Call the meeting to order, everyone. We'll get started. Our witnesses are here. Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, meeting number 142. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3H7, Study of Privacy of Digital Government Services. The witnesses we have today with us are from the Canadian Bankers Association, Angelina Mason, General Counsel and Vice President, Marina Mandel, Vice President, Banking, Transformation and Strategy. And lastly, with SimCorp Incorporated, Della Shea, Vice President, Privacy and Data Governance and Chief Privacy Officer. We'll start off with, I believe it's Angelina.
It's Ms. Mandel.
Sorry, Miss Marina. We'll start off with you, first of all, with 10 minutes.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to appear before the committee. My name is Marina Mandel, and I'm joined today by the CBA's General Counsel and Vice President, Angelina Mason. Just before I continue my opening remarks, I just want to apologize in advance if my voice drops during my comments. I'm just fighting off a cold or flu or something. So the concept of digital government, when we're already living in a digital society, should be welcomed. This is especially true in the area of identification. We're establishing who we are, and what we're eligible to do is one of the foundational tasks of government. Despite remarkable advances in technology that accelerate with each year, we're still tethered to an analog model that relies on presenting physical documents to establish our identity in multiple daily transactions we have with public services, businesses, and each other. The good news is there's a modern solution to this challenge. The Canadian banking sector is ideally situated to underpin a digital ID system that will revolutionize the way we use personal data to interact with the world. The current system is deficient in three major ways. First, it's outdated, especially when it relies on physical documents like driver's licenses and utility bills. These documents can be forged or stolen and used fraudulently. Requiring face-to-face transactions also places a burden on those in remote communities and those with mobility challenges who could be forced to travel long distances to conduct basic business or access essential services. Second, even today's technology-based approaches are clumsy. The two-factor identification sequence used online, where you enter a username and password, can be easily compromised. It's also a hassle for users who must remember dozens of login credentials. Third, inefficient methods of establishing identity are a drag on economic growth. They slow down the speed of transactions, introduce uncertainty, and are prone to costly errors. Countries around the world realize the situation is untenable and are crossing the electronic frontier to explore the benefits of implementing digital identity systems. When ID goes digital, citizens can verify their identity electronically using a combination of existing systems and newer biometric tools, such as fingerprints or facial recognition. With the growing number of Canadians accessing services and businesses online, and the increased use of mobile phones, Canada is in a position to move forward with its own robust digital identity system. Two recent developments have added momentum to this trend. First, updates made in 2018 to the Bank Act expressly allow banks to provide identification, verification, and authentication services beyond the needs of their own operations. This is a contemporary acknowledgement of what has always been true about banks. They know who their customers are, know about their financial status, and can attest to both. Historically, banks would write physical letters of introduction for clients to help them in personal or business matters in distant locations. The endorsement of a bank created trust among strangers. The second development is that the CBA produced a white paper last year that lays out a clear path for making digital ID a reality in Canada. We took into account our country's unique characteristics, advanced institutions, and sophisticated infrastructure to develop a framework for what could work here. We call for a federated model of digital ID because it would align with Canada's political structure. A federated model works by creating linkages between federal and provincial identity management systems. Right now, identity is spread across multiple isolated regimes. For instance, the federal government has social insurance and passport information, but the provinces manage health cards and driver's licenses. The first step in our model envisions maintaining these distinct systems, but connecting the disparate elements in such a way that someone's identity can be authenticated electronically using a combination of attributes. Instantly verifying someone who is using multiple digital reference points is more secure than relying on a plastic license card that could be a forgery. Because this digital network is connected yet decentralized, the risk of compromising the system is reduced by eliminating honeypots of data that hackers tend to target. The second step is to harness the power of the private sector. This would enable the creation of a digital ID system without the cost and risk of building complex infrastructure from scratch. Canada's banks already operate across the country and around the world. We have robust interconnected electronic systems that citizens can access from branches, bank machines, home computers, and mobile phones. These networks are up and running 24 hours a day, all year long. More importantly, banks are already held to a high standard when it comes to collecting and safeguarding the personal information of customers. For banks, the privacy of their clients' data and personal information is at the core of what they do. Banks are subject to rigorous oversight to ensure this data is held accurately and securely from one end of a transaction to the other. The third step in our federated model involves passing legislation that would allow business and government to accept digital ID. Banks must know their clients as part of Canada's fight against money laundering and terrorist financing. That involves thoroughly gathering and maintaining customer information and financial intelligence subject to strict regulations. It's true that some client ID requirements under anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing legislation have been modified to allow face-to-face verification. However, the rules continue to be rooted in physical ID. Our industry is ready and willing to work with Treasury Board, the Department of Finance, ISET, and other departments and agencies to explore ways to accommodate the technologies of the connected age. The government is already starting to explore other ways to update financial transaction, and blockchain and artificial intelligence are pushing into new frontiers. With these developments, the demand for digital ID will only grow more urgent. Banks stand ready to contribute energy and resources to build a federated model for Canada. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you once again. Next up, we have Ms. Shea with Simcor Incorporated for 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to thank you, Mr. Chair, and also the members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today on such an important topic and to share perspectives as the government endeavors to understand how to improve services for Canadians while also protecting their privacy and their security. My name is Della Shea, and I am the Chief Privacy and Data Governance Officer at Simcor, and I offer my comments this afternoon based on approximately 20 years of experience leading internationally recognized data privacy and security programs at Simcor. For those of you who may not be familiar with Simcor, we are one of Canada's leading providers of business process outsourcing services to the financial services sector. We offer a diverse portfolio of traditional and also digital services, including payment processing, statement production, document management, and also fraud analytics. We also provide services to other organizations in retail, utilities, and telecommunications sectors, and more recently, also to some governments. We have close to 2,000 employees that work across Canada. You've asked how government can improve services for Canadians while also protecting their privacy and their security. So in addressing this question, I would like to share some of my insights as well as experiences gleaned from actually embedding privacy and security into our services at Simcor. In this regard, my comments will focus on establishing and maintaining trust, and specifically 3 core tenets that underpin trust. Firstly, privacy by design and data stewardship. Secondly, the role of trusted service providers in a digital ecosystem. And finally, consistent legislative framework. I will address these in turn. So firstly, as many of you and members of the privacy community are aware, the concept of privacy by design calls for privacy to be taken into account through the planning and service delivery process. In short, privacy must be an organization's default mode of operation. Governmental bodies will have to take a similar approach. My recommendation is to establish controls on how governments design their systems. And the privacy by design framework should be used in order to embed privacy into operations. A second concept closely related to privacy by design is data stewardship. Data stewardship and being an effective data steward is about actually operationalizing the accountability model that has been set forth under Canadian privacy legislation. As Canada's privacy commissioners have highlighted, it is about the clear acceptance of responsibility for the personal information protection of the information under their control. As the government considers its approach to rendering services to Canadians, I would urge the adoption of a data stewardship model. At a very practical level, this means maintaining accountability for protecting Canadians' privacy and security. Next, I would like to also briefly touch on the critical role of a trusted service provider in the digital ecosystem. The shift to platforms and ecosystems has already happened. This represents the future for all organizations, including governments. The new digital ecosystem has brought the opportunity to create new and innovative operating models and new partners, intermediaries, and also collaborators. Under the Canadian private sector privacy legislative framework, there is an elegant rule that organizations are responsible for the personal information in their custody and control, including when this information is also transferred to third parties. It is critical for government to establish a working model that consists of trusted service providers and intermediaries in this digital ecosystem. This will consist of a model where organizations are held to a consistent standard to minimize the likelihood of systemic vulnerabilities, but more generally to provide confidence in the digital ecosystem and digital service delivery. In a similar vein, as a matter of gaining and maintaining public trust, there must be consistent and robust privacy rules for the private sector and broader public sector for data processing activities to avoid any gaps in privacy coverage. In short, all players in the digital landscape, both private sector and public sector, need to be following consistent and robust privacy legislation. The role of government will be fundamental in establishing consistent, robust privacy rules applicable to the digital ecosystem. And this brings me to my conclusion. The Data Strategy Roadmap for the Federal Public Service, published last fall, outlines a comprehensive vision to overcome silos and leverage data as a valuable asset. I applaud the government for embarking on this study to consider privacy and security as it undertakes this journey. I would encourage the government to design a maturity model that will scale to the future, one that considers privacy and security not only at the foundational level of digitizing government services, but also contemplates a fully digitized society where everyone and everything is connected to a fluid and ever-expanding ecosystem. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shea. Next up, we have for questions, starting off with Mr. Sandy for 7 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. I was very, very taken, wanted to take a look at your opening comments, Ms. Mandel, because you said something which I wanted to sort of maybe dig down a little bit deeper just so I have a better understanding. I mean, we know right now that if we're going to do anything in digital government, we need private sector involvement. That it has to go hand in hand, not only to leverage the intelligence in the private sector, but also the sort of advanced technology that they have. We also know right now that information, especially in Canada, is very decentralized, with different levels of government holding information, even different departments holding different information. In the white paper you wrote, you talked about the federated approach to the digital ID framework, and you mentioned some of that in your opening comments. Can you maybe just give us a more maybe broader understanding of how that will work, and in contrast to the Estonian model with X-Road, because you said one thing which I think is similar to the X-Road is that there's no honeypots, but with the X-Road they started from greenfields, which we're not going to be able to start from a greenfield. We have more advanced systems here, legacy systems. Different departments have different systems. So how could we compare the two? To how would the federated approach work as compared to the X-Road, which is a different approach in Estonia?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So I know that the CBA's white paper, for those of you who have had a chance to review it, does talk about two countries, in particular Estonia and India, which are quite different for a number of reasons from Canada. We thought, as I think this committee did as well, looking at Estonia is sort of a model example within the specific context and culture of that country. So I would say what the similarities between the lessons learned from Estonia for Canada is the paramount importance of privacy and data security. My understanding is the federal government's digital exchange project adopts similar technology to what underlies the X-Road. So those are two things we can take from Estonia. I would say pretty much after that, everything is quite different. The federated model works with Canada's governance. So we have multiple levels of government. Foundational identity documents sit with different levels. So birth certificates sit with provincial government, and citizenship immigration documents sit with the federal government. So the federated model makes sense because of that decentralization. And I think, when we look at the private sector involvement, I think in Estonia it was pretty much a government top-down position as it was in India, whereas in Canada, we already have movement. We have things that are in flight right now. I'll talk about a couple of things, probably a few more times through my comments today. The Digital ID Authentication Council of Canada was created coming out of the task force on payments that was appointed by former Finance Minister Flaherty, because the task force on payments said for digital payments to work, you absolutely need digital ID. So the DIAC, the Digital ID Authentication Council of Canada, has at the table provincial governments, federal government, telcos, banks, credit unions. So they have come together to try to create, or they are creating, in the process of creating, a pan-Canadian trust framework. That would ideally underlie all players in the digital ecosystem in Canada.
Thank you. Mr. Shea, I wanted to come back to you just with I know you have the private sector experience that's there. We talk about a process called onboarding, and onboarding in Canada. So just if you give me sort of a runway of how it would work, because onboarding in Canada would involve 37 million people. You have people living all across this country. Some people who are able to access the internet. Some people who live in areas, unfortunately, where broadband is still not available. You have people who are digital savvy, and you have some people who may not be that digital savvy. So how are you going to get everybody on board? Because there obviously will have to be economies of scale that are involved. And if this system is going to work, everybody has to participate. So the onboarding process for me seems like one of the rate limiting steps, as we say in science. So how would that work?
So I would like to suggest a few things. Starting with, in my comments, I had suggested having a maturity model and actually realizing that you can't do everything all at once. So having patience in terms of how are you going to ultimately achieve a goal of having a digital service, having a digital government, and ultimately a digital society. That is the road ahead of us. So being patient and having a maturity model to clearly articulate how you're going to be able to accommodate individual citizens from all different walks of life. Dr. Geist, in one of his earlier comments when he appeared before this committee, talked about the universal access issue. I think that's a very important issue to think about and address, especially when you are considering the geographical limitations and challenges of Canada. Being able to provide universal, affordable access is going to be a major challenge for Canada. Underpinning this is also understanding not everybody, even if they had access, would have the capability of being able to partake in government services. So this educational component becomes a very important piece of the puzzle. I would recommend that the government look at a parallel way of implementing the onboarding of individuals and also being patient, because it is going to be a journey. Not everyone's going to have an equal playing field in getting onto that new ecosystem.
Just a follow-up question. I'm going to just shift tact a little bit, and I'm going to ask you this question specifically, but because I believe that the organization you represent has a lot of experience with cybercrime and cyber fraud. Now, we know that 80% of cybercrime and cyber fraud is committed by organized criminal activity, and we're living in an age now where there are state actors and non-state actors. So, although there would be no honeypot, so there will be not one area where information will reside, all the information will reside, we're still going to be prone to that. So one of the things of privacy is domestically, I mean, you have a robust system, but internationally, when we have potential attacks, potential cybercrime, maybe attacks on a certain part of the system, which may contain more information than others. How do we protect ourselves from that? And the reason I say that is because you have a lot of non-state actors now that are extremely well resourced and well financed. So how do we deal with that?
So I would like to suggest the importance of shared intelligence. And I think going into a digital transformation for the government, you will have cyber attacks. There will be threats. I think that's given. So ensuring that you have designed security into the systems at the very beginning, and to not look at it as one type of control, but a multi-layered set of controls. So at SimCore, as an example, our strategy is really about having a multi-layered approach to security. So right from the data layer to the application layer, infrastructure, network. It's really about having that layered approach. And I think to think about the importance of shared intelligence and having a framework, and this is going to require some thought from a legislative and policy perspective to enable data sharing across entities for the purpose of getting ahead of those potential bad actors that are attacking the system.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cini. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for appearing today. It's been interesting to follow particularly with regards to the Banking Association, the interest expressed and the vision tested by your president, Mr. Parmenter, at a speech in January. In your opening remarks, Ms. Mandel, you mentioned the three challenges: the clumsiness, the outdatedness, and the drag on economic growth. Which of those did the commercial banks address first, or is it possible, do you believe, for the public service, as opposed to the private sector, to address all of those at the same time?
So I think fundamentally it absolutely has to be a public-private partnership in Canada. As I indicated in my earlier response, government owns the foundational documents proving identity. So I don't see standalone solutions, at least none that are in flight in the market right now. One of the solutions that's a private sector solution done in partnership with the banks is Secure Key Concierge, and I know you heard from Secure Key a couple of weeks ago. In terms of your question, those three things, Secure Key's product does address all three, I would say. Not so much the economic growth one, I think, just because it's a limited use case right now. So as you know, it allows access to over 80 government services, so it gets rid of the users who maybe only access the CRA once or twice a year, but access their bank online maybe every week or every 2 weeks. Really takes away from that proliferation of usernames and passwords. They only have to remember the one to log into their account. And then the outdatedness, again, you're getting rid of the physical need to tie into the CRA and other government services. The economic growth one, I think, as we see, it's still, digital ID is a pretty nascent market in Canada, both from a public sector perspective and a private sector perspective. So I think as we see that market develop at both levels, both public and private, we'll see more use cases that address the economic growth point.
In terms of the outdated aspect, we had testimony a couple of months ago that suggested that something like the Nexus card, biometrics, the use of biometrics across the board as it's used for travel security at the moment, but have the commercial banks looked at implementing biometrics in place of the old standard identification? So
I think on biometrics would be somewhat challenged from a legislative barrier perspective on the AML front. So there's no commercial bank initiatives around digital ID and authentication that relies on biometrics, to my knowledge, in Canada. Well, not in Canada for sure, but even I'm trying to think globally. The one example of biometrics being used in digital ID I can think of is the project that's currently being developed by in Ontario in support of the Ontario efforts towards digital ID, which is EID.me, I believe is the name of it. It was done in partnership with a financial technology company, and it would have the your identity, your identifier for Ontario government purposes only, on your phone, and should be password and biometric, either thumbprint or facial recognition linked. So that, in terms of globally and in Canada, that's I'd say the major one that attempts to integrate, go the biometrics route versus the bank login credentials.
Ms. Shea, thoughts from the commercial sector on the use of something like the Nexus card for secure digital ID?
For sure. So again, in private sector, it is different because of the legislative requirements. I think the key to having a biometric type of device for considering that, similar to the Nexus model, is it's really a consent-based model. So I think that would be pivotal, because requiring a biometric of all Canadians, I think that would be a very challenging path to go down.
In terms of travel security, it's not a problem because the benefit outweighs whatever concerns might exist.
Exactly.
Might there not be the same attraction in other realms?
It's actually a really good point. So making sure that you have that risk-benefit paradigm and giving people the option, making it transparent. Certainly, if it is an option for citizens and they are adopting this as part of making their lives more convenient, I think would be something worth exploring. Pivotal to that, though, is really around having really robust security and having governance around that process.
Which would require change in the law.
Yes.
Now, as we've seen in the public service with regards to the Phoenix Pay system, one of the problems is when governments approach a vendor, the vendor provides a product, a suggested product, and the purchaser, the procurer, decides to eliminate some of the recommended safety aspects, security safety aspects, and then we see the disaster that we've got today. We see the same thing with the Boeing 737 and the safety additions that required extra payment, extra training, and so forth. How do you overcome that in terms of private sector partnership with government at all different levels? How do you ensure that government political decision-making doesn't interfere with success?
Well, everything is going to be a cost-benefit analysis. So to have, first of all, there's no such thing as absolute perfect security. To achieve even close to perfect security will impact not only the financial aspect of that, but also the utility of the service. So you have to really take a balanced approach. InfoWay is an example that I would urge the government to look to in terms of how they have established a process for vendors to present a solution for healthcare services, but there is an oversight and there is a governance around the vendors that become certified through that process. So that would be a model that the government could look to as a potential way to frame how do you actually certify a vendor or a service provider to actually engage with government services. So having those minimum standards would be absolutely critical. In addition to having an assessment process to assess those various vendors wanting to become part of that ecosystem, and then that ongoing monitoring. So to your example about the airplanes as an example, is really having that oversight. It doesn't just happen once. It's no longer just about a project. It's now about a product, and it's about a process, and having a governance framework around end-to-end ongoing is really critical.
Well, and not rushing to get a program into place before it's ready.
Absolutely.
Ms. Mandel, your thoughts in this area? Oh, I'm sorry.
We're at time, but if you have
come
a
back.
quick, okay, that's fine.
Such a good chair.
Trying to be nice. Next up for
Gives me a little bit extra.
for
Have I ever
7
said
minutes,
what a good chair you are?
Mr. Angus, you
I'm
do.
not going to challenge the chair today.
Go ahead, Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this presentation. I deal with fraud all the time now in my offices, and the 419 scams started out pretty, I mean, you'd have to be very naive to fall for them, but they become increasingly sophisticated, and I've been shocked at how many people, and in fact, many people probably never come forward who've been victims of these scams. And the only way it seems that we're stopping them is literally when the bank teller says no. People transferring funds to relatives that are in jail someplace, people transferring money to someone who they want to marry that doesn't exist, people transferring funds because they're afraid the CRA is going to arrest them. They're becoming increasingly sophisticated, and their power comes from if you have 1 point of information on someone, it's a long shot. If you have 2 points, you're getting very good. If you have 3 points of information on someone, you're getting very dead-eye accurate. And with AI, with the ability to glean stuff off the net, more and more of this fraud is going to take place. So it seems to me in the work that I do in my MP's office that often the only thing that stops it is a bank teller saying, I think you're a victim of fraud here. So what are the mechanisms that are in the industry to start to deal with this incredibly the growing sophistication of targeting people for fraud? Bankers Association?
I would say a significant part of it is education. So we do educate and let consumers know the risks out there. I think also it's a sharing of information to find technological ways to block certain types of communications. With the recent launch of the Cybersecurity Center through Canada, Scott Jones, who was recently at our Cybersecurity Summit, was chatting with us about ways that we could actually, from a technology perspective, block those types of communications. It would require some sophisticated analysis and some sharing across how our systems work within the industry, but we are very eager to participate in those types of discussions to see if we can even take more proactive ways to address that concern.
Thank you. Well, last year, 90,000 Simply Financial and BMO customers were affected by a breach of personal financial information. Customers reported they received conflicting answers about the timing and the scope of the breach, which was worrying. Now, was that breach a malevolent outside actor? I mean, what was the nature that citizens were affected by?
I can't speak to the specifics of the breach. What I can say is that, we have been leaders in the cybersecurity space. We have had an excellent record. It was a rare incident, and I can assure you that banks took measures to ensure their customers were whole financially and provided other assistance to them. And we continue to always continue to fight the fight. We are always looking at ways to detect. I mean, it's a daily thing. We are constantly finding ways to address the attacks, and we continue to look at that from both perspective of sharing of information, understanding what new types of attacks could be coming at us. But we invest heavily in this space, and we continue to make it a priority.
Thank you. I got to confess, I don't keep my money in the bank. I'm in the Caisse Populaire. But I've been a victim of a few fraud instances, and I'm amazed when they contact immediately and say, something happened on your card. And that level of speed, I find, is very interesting. So is that part of this whole move towards increasing technological ability to intervene to stop fraud?
So there's different layers. So there's the cybersecurity type of measures, which are really to address if someone's actually trying to get into our systems and get access to the information. There's other types of compromises that can happen on fraud, which aren't really cyber related. It's your credentials have been shared, or your card has been compromised because they found out the numbers and the pins. So in addition to just addressing cyber, we do all sorts of monitoring, so we can detect if there's unusual activity to identify different types of compromises and address them immediately.
Thank you. RBC was named, I think it was in the New York Times, in one of the Facebook app issues where they were given, because of their app, they preferred access, which gave them the ability to read private messages on Facebook. RBC said that they never had that access. Facebook said that they did. The Privacy Commissioner is investigating. Does the Banker Association look into these issues to be able to reassure customers that that kind of undue personal information is not being accessed by a bank?
We would have not been part of that.
No.
All right. Part of our work here is about protecting privacy policies and privacy rights of citizens and private data. I note that I think CIBC and RBC at least have noted in their privacy policies that data can be transferred processed or stored outside of Canada. That does raise questions for our committee in terms of trying to ensure the protection of financial data. Do you have a policy on trying to ensure that the data is kept in Canada, where we have, at least with our privacy laws and our national standards, that we know that the private information will be kept?
Having data outside Canada internationally is a common, not just across the financial institutions, but across a full range of companies. And the Privacy Commissioner has addressed this in guidance. It's so commonplace that you deal with it in a variety of ways. First of all, our federal privacy legislation requires that if data is to be housed outside of Canada, it must be through contractual and other measures treated as secure as if it were in Canada. And there's also a requirement of providing notice to consumers so that they are aware of that.
And under the U.S., it would be under the does that data come under the Patriot Act?
If you're talking about the potential for that data to be accessed in a lawful manner, it could be accessed through, but it would that would of course require a warrant approach.
Yeah, no, I mean, because again, we had many. I've dealt with a number of citizens who were born in the U.S. and there was the whole tax issue, and the United States was demanding that they pay taxes, and we had citizens who lived here 40, 50 years and were concerned. So are they made aware that their data may be held in the United States and under the Patriot Act when they sign up for an account?
So yes, we provide disclosure where data is, that data may be outside of Canada and the implications of that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Angus. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Picard.
Thank you. I have a three-part question. What is your understanding of open banking system? What is your take on this from a security standpoint? And would that be a model, if it's good, that could follow the Keynesian government?
And go ahead. Sorry. So it's, as you, I'm sure know, the government issued its first formal consultation paper on open banking in January. We put in a submission along with other stakeholders in February, and I'll get into that in a sec. And then over the last, since the deadline in February, we've been in conversations. I would say it's very early days on open banking. The way we approached our comments was really to think through the risks that we think are posed, and those were aligned with what the government identified in their consultation paper, concerns around consumer protection, privacy, financial crime, and financial stability. We focused primarily on the first three. And we talked about potential risk mitigation strategies, both from a regulated perspective and from a more industry-led solutions perspective. So that's how we have framed out our thinking on open banking. I think it's really early days, and we're continuing to have discussions with the government when they ask us to provide some views. But yeah, early days and still a lot still to come.
The fact that...
Sorry, I was going to... Do you mind if I add to that?
No, please.
SimCorp...
I'm not.
Okay, so SimCorp provided a submission to that call for papers as well. And our recommendations really came down to what I had outlined earlier this afternoon in terms of recommendations, primarily around the privacy by design and security by design, as well as having a framework to assess all actors in that ecosystem, with the concern potentially being vulnerabilities, essentially the weakest link vulnerability. So having an appropriate assessment process to ensure everyone in that ecosystem was maintaining at least a minimum level of privacy and security. And essentially what we've recommended is ensuring that privacy and security was really cherished above all. So thinking about the utility, the convenience of open banking, also ensuring that protecting Canadians was really paramount. So I think that, again, as Marina had mentioned, we're early days. It is an important mandate for the government to be considering and looking at, especially with developments internationally. And I also believe that it's an opportunity to look at international standards. So again, a little bit of go slow to go fast, potentially.
If actually the system manage duplicated data everywhere, and the open banking system or concept proposes that we have just one place where the data is, and exchange of information whether different data needs to be combined and used. If you have a unique system where you have a unique data, at least unique sources, the apparent beauty of it is that you don't look everywhere, it's just at one place. You need a very sophisticated security system to avoid breach, because if you are breached, you lose everything. So is it a calculated risk?
I think you've hit on absolutely what was our key concerns as the Bankers Association around cybersecurity in the context, and financial crime more broadly, in the context of open banking. With the customer, as you know, the customer consents to have their personal financial information transferred to another provider, whether it's a bank or perhaps a fintech that's not as stringently regulated as banks. Once that happens, and if that information then goes further down the line, so the third-party provider provides to another party, we worry about with the increased connectivity and just the proliferation of entities having access to the data. That definitely makes it harder in the case of a cyber attack to determine your points of vulnerability, number one. And number two, again, not all third-party providers will be regulated the same way. We were pleased to see in the budget this year the announcement of the cybersecurity legislation forthcoming, but we worry about entities that might not be subject to comprehensive regulatory oversight on both privacy and on cyber.
Ms. Shea, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the word trusted many times. What are the criteria for someone to be trusted supplier? Because in business, there's no such thing as trust. And in politics, I guess.
So the term trusted provider to me is really that you have a commitment to what your values and standards are right from the get-go, and that you have support from the top of the organization all the way to every layer. And essentially that's necessary to actually do what you promise to do. So it's not enough to just have a statement or a policy saying you're going to protect privacy. You really need to have the infrastructure, the communication, the buy-in across everybody involved in delivering a service, who understand, number one, what their goals and obligations are, and number two, that they have the tools to be able to execute on those things. And that really requires, number one, a commitment. It requires understanding across the entire organization. And understanding really comes down to making things simple and easy for anyone to be able to understand what they have to do to achieve that trust or to achieve that commitment. In this case, we're talking about privacy. So what does that mean? Making everyone understand. At SimCorp, we did this by implementing a set of data values. So we have a set of data values which stand for privacy, accountability, compliance, and trust. And we leverage these values to be able to communicate to everyone. It's not just a bunch of things that are buried in a policy. These are the things that you commit to doing every day. And that communication is enforced through a lot of interesting and fun activities. So we host annual Data Privacy Day where we have quizzes and games, we have training, and our data values are actually represented by a little mascot, which is actually an owl. And he's quite popular across the organization, and people look forward to little notes and messages. So it's about doing what you say you're going to do, and then standing behind it with the commitment, whether it be financial commitment, because it does require that that level of commitment as well.
Thank you, Ms. Picard. Next up for 5 minutes, Ms. Gourde.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses to be here with this whole universe of digital identification. I think that Canadians deserve to feel safe and have to feel that their data and the privacy of their data is being kept. I have an issue with regards to the housing of digital data outside of Canada, that the legislation might not be the same as Canada. If you have any advice for us, should we house data, digital Canadian data in Canada to facilitate the task if there's an issue? Or are international laws very similar to that of Canada and allow us to feel safe? the actual data component of digital data, but I would say that it's the requirement that information be kept secure, and as I spoke earlier, our privacy framework enables us to have data in Canada and outside of Canada, provided that we have appropriate contractual and other measures to ensure the same level of safety.
And just on the data point as it ties into digital ID, I just want to make sure we understand. I know you've heard from Secure Key, they talked about the triple blind authentication. So the idea, and I'm using Secure Key because it is a live private sector, private-public sector partnership that's in market. The triple blind authentication means no one's actually seeing data. So let's say I go to the bank and or I use my bank credentials to log into the CRA. The bank doesn't know that. The CRA doesn't know who my bank is, and Secure Key doesn't see any of that. So it's all the way the technology works is no one's seeing anything, and it's all done with obviously me opting in, me consenting, or proactively using the product. So digital ID isn't that flow of data back and forth. It's not the open banking situation. It's really just the authentication and attribute validation components of it.
Earlier, in the recommendations, you spoke of taking the time to implement these new technologies to make sure that they are well functioning and to provide good services. So is this a horizon of 1 to 3 years, of 3 to 5 years, even 10 years? What is it?
Sorry, I just want to ensure I understand the question. Is it, what is the horizon to be able to implement technologies in a safe way? Okay, thank you. I believe that it's an ongoing process. So I don't necessarily believe that there's a specific time element tied to this. Technologies are not all of an equal playing field right now. Some are much more mature than others. So I think if you look at large players that have invested significant amounts of time, energy, as well as funding into those technologies where there is history, those are things that could be more readily adopted. I would caution, however, as new technologies come into market, having an effective way to be able to do proper assessment to ensure that those technologies are achieving the actual goal beyond just privacy and security, but ensuring that the utility and functionality is doing what was originally intended. So I believe it's not a one-size-fits-all. There could be a tiered approach to doing an assessment of technologies, some in terms of established technology in the marketplace versus ones that are emerging. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pour une évaluation efficace,
For efficient assessment, can we progressively implement these new technologies in a sector, in a part of Canada, in a province, or in a city to do this for assessment purposes before providing services to all Canadians and then trying to patch up the problem if there is one?
So I believe actually that's an excellent recommendation. If you assess once, you can apply it multiple times. I think that's an important efficiency play. So having a structure, I mentioned earlier, Canada's Health InfoWay has a structure where they certify a technology, which essentially would enable others to leverage these technology within the healthcare industry without having to do the same assessment over and over again.
And I can just add on to that. I completely agree that is a great idea. It's a way to iteratively test without putting customer information at risk. And just to flag a couple of places where it's happening. So in New Brunswick, they have rolled out digital ID. So I'm just specifically talking about the technology around digital ID. The government has rolled out digital ID only on pilot project basis. In British Columbia, I believe that's sort of the intent as well. And sometimes, just Illinois, for one, is using digital ID specifically for tracking who's licensed to be a doctor. So there's that kind of use case as well, where you're looking at maybe the need is very high there for whatever reason. So a use case based on the technology used, as well as use cases based on the type of identification authentication problem you're trying to solve for.
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Gord. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. I have some questions about digital ID, but my first question is more privacy focused. And so on October 24th, I make a purchase at the Ontario Cannabis Store, and it took weeks to get delivered because this provincial Conservative government can't even sell weed right. But eventually it arrived, and it was recorded on my credit card statement. And it's fine. I'm a Canadian citizen. It's legal to purchase cannabis online, as it ought to be. And it's not legal, though, in the United States. And then we hear stories about Canadians crossing the border and being asked if they have consumed cannabis in their lifetime because it remains a crime most places in the United States. What assurance do I have as a Canadian that that credit card statement that acknowledges my transaction of illicit purchase in Canada but an illicit activity in the United States is protected and secure, and that my privacy is safe?
On that point, it would be that, there are if, for example, if you're talking about where that transactional data information is housed, so if let's say, for example, it is housed in the U.S., the only way that data could be accessed for a purpose of seeing whether or not you were meeting this question would be through a formalized warrant process under the Patriot Act. So I don't anticipate that would be something that would be as a real problem in the sense of I don't think it would be applied that way. That legislation is really intended to address cases of national importance, not an individual's particular use of a substance. So I don't see that being something that would be of concern.
And have banks, I guess, turned their minds to the question of when Canadians are engaging in legal activities here that are illegal where we would commonly travel, like the United States, to ensure that the record of those activities are not shared with or not, I guess, liable to be accessed by American authorities in any way?
Well, just to clarify that, we would have contractual protections to ensure they're not shared, other than there would be the possibility that you could have a proper warrant served in that country. But what I'm saying is I can't anticipate that a warrant would be served in that context, because if it were something as significant as being under the Patriot Act, I would imagine it to be something of a national sort of crime nature, not an individual one-on-one use.
I'm less worrisome in all probability. So with respect to digital ID, in opening comments noted ready and willing to help the Government of Canada. We had Alex Benet in front of us, and he spoke about federated digital ID as well, and some steps they've taken towards that. Perhaps from the Canadian Bankers Association's perspective, what are the next steps that have to be taken to get us closer to this federated digital ID?
So I think the absolute, what's extremely important is the work that's being done by DIAC on the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. A lot of the questions that have been asked so far by this committee and the things we have spoken to, privacy, data security, standards that operate across borders, transparency of governance, open standards, a lot of that the intent is to have it be worked out and put in place through the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. So that, to me, so in terms of timeline, that's the anticipated completion of the trust framework is next year. There's discussion drafts that are being produced right now for public comment, so targeted for 2020. I think that's a very crucial first step. The standards include privacy by design, so there's 10 principles underlying a digital ID ecosystem. The other great thing about the DIAC Pan-Canadian Trust Framework process is you've got different levels of government at the table, you've got different private sector players at the table, as well as technology companies that could help build a solution from a tech perspective. What that does is creates the interoperability. So on principle, if the federal government, as they are doing with Sign in Canada, creates their own, or they're intending to do, they're in the process of developing their own digital ID solution, but you've got Secure Keys digital ID solution, which also meets or is intended to meet what the PCTF will look like. What that allows the federal government, for instance, or a provincial government to do is say, you can use either. So if you go to New Brunswick again right now, you can log in as they're running pilot projects on digital ID. You can either enter the New Brunswick, the pilot project with your New Brunswick government issued digital ID or your secure key concierge digital ID. So that to me is sort of the immediate next step. And I think another sort of bigger part of it that where the Canadian Bankers Association, or not bigger, but broader, where the Canadian Bankers Association has been playing a role is just socializing the concept, right? Ensuring that Canadians, one of the MPs just said, people need to feel safe. They need to understand the product. Canadians hear about cyber breaches all the time. So I think that's also that sort of educational and promotion part of digital ID.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next up, for 5 minutes, Mr. Kent.
I'd like to continue on that point, because one of the challenges in Canada, unlike Estonia, is public skepticism about the protection of, on one hand, their health records, on the other hand, their financial records with regards to the CRA, not necessarily with banks, although, as Mr. Angus said, certainly fraud is an increasing problem, and there are any number of ways, although the banks have countered it quite effectively. I, too, have had credit card breaches that the bank has notified me about within minutes of an attempted use of a card and its number. Would the private sector recommend pilot projects on a fairly limited, even a semi-regional area, given the fact that generationally we have Canadians who do not use digital devices to any great extent at all, even with regards to still insisting that there be a human teller at their bank and that their transactions be conducted on paper? Would you recommend a scaled down, fairly narrow pilot project, unlike New Brunswick, but for urban centers first in a certain reduced way? We've seen, for example, in Ontario, for example, in Toronto, an inability to implement the digital exchange of medical information between GPs, specialists, hospitals, clinics, and so forth. They've been talking about that for 20 years now, and it's still an incomplete, imperfect project. So would you suggest pilot projects in one particular area, be it healthcare or CRA related, but again on a very limited scale, to develop the success model that would give confidence to more resistant demographics to embrace and to engage?
Sure. So
both of you, yes, please.
I believe doing a pilot makes practical sense for a number of reasons. I think just the sheer scale of trying to onboard folks, communicate and educate individuals what this means would be very untenable. In terms of conducting a pilot, however, I would urge the pilot to be on an opt-in basis to really for the purpose of developing something with the intention of iterating. So ensuring that you're not trying to bite off everything and be perfect, but just to begin that engagement, it would also be a really practical way to start introducing the concept, especially if it's set out so it's an optional activity where the folks in charge of developing the solutions would take that information. Having that public engagement would be an interesting model. But I think certainly knowing and understanding going in that it would be an iterative process. And I believe that's really what privacy by design principles are really about. It's about, understanding what the requirements are up front, then all along the way is going back and checking, did we meet those initial requirements? Did we meet that intent? Take that feedback and iterate again and again.
Thank you. So I just want to underscore on the public skepticism point, 100% agree. We talk a lot about innovation these days, at least definitely in the banking industry, and obviously this committee's been looking at digital transformation in the government context. Crucial to consumer trust is knowing that primarily privacy, data security will be protected. So that's our starting point. Part of building I referenced earlier, sort of this public education role that I think the public sector and the private sector have, is to explain to people, digital ID isn't a company you just heard of, SecureKey, handing over all your data, they're not actually seeing it, right? So going through that explanation process in as plain language a way as possible, I think is very helpful. Then the people in the ecosystem. So are they abiding by the standards and principles? Can everyone agree on them? And are they at a high enough level? So there's a difference between having a bank or a telecommunications company or a provincial or federal government authenticate you online versus Facebook or any other social media company, solely because those are self-created identities. There's no fundamental identity, government-issued identity underlying that, right? So, when you talk about digital ID and kind of parsing out public appetite, I think it's just going to be public appetite as well, based on who you're bringing to the ecosystem, what kind of products they're offering, and the optionality and the convenience for the consumer.
And in the case of the New Brunswick parallel projects, the two approaches, is there any early evidence that would give a taste of the user satisfaction? Or
I couldn't find much information on it. It seems to be a fairly closed pilot project that's just beta testing the technology on both sides, both the New Brunswick government's technology as well as the SecureKey concierge has been in place for a while. And sorry, I didn't quite respond to the pilot project point. It's interesting. I think you've heard from both of us, both me and Michelle today, about the importance of pilot projects in use cases. But you take something like SecureKey Concierge, it's got about 7 to 8 million users now that are signed up to the system. It started in 2012. So in 7 years, that's a significant part of the Canadian population. So you never know with a pilot project how it might just kind of take off and really demonstrate a broader social desire for something that makes, frankly, Canadians' lives easier.
But again, it's selling the cost-benefit
Exactly.
concept.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up, Ms. Vanderbilt for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. I think it was you, Ms. Shee, who talked about the fact that there will be cyber attacks, and that one of the best ways to get around that is by sharing intelligence. Who did you mean in terms of sharing intelligence?
I believe the concept of sharing intelligence is going to be increasingly important. And sharing intelligence across sectors is going to be something that I think will be very important to be considered. Within various industry sectors, there is limitations in terms of information being shared. At SimCorp, we have a limited use case around providing the capability for our clients to do limited information sharing for the purpose of detecting fraud. Not cyber attacks, that's something we'd like to get to, but for fraud, with really the intention of having a lockdown controlled process, very focused on the intent of that use case, which is to get ahead of those bad actors before the event or the effect of that event actually happens. Certainly, it's an area of discussion south of the border around public-private partnerships. I do believe having a framework to be able to share that intelligence with that purpose will be increasingly important. Overlaying that, however, is having strong privacy governance and oversight, because often there is this tension between security needing as much information as possible for the purpose of, getting ahead of the bad actors quickly. But I think there's definitely a point in the middle that can be met. So it's to enable more increased data sharing, but under a privacy governance umbrella.
So moving from the private sector to government, how would that work? Because as you've indicated, obviously sharing anything between even departments, let alone between government and the private sector, could raise a lot of privacy concerns. So how do you ensure that when you're sharing information for the purposes of keeping out or learning what the bad actors are doing so that you can secure your systems versus creating those access points to share information?
Sure. So it really definitely requires a layered approach from the infrastructure to be able to do this. Having security, privacy embedded into that design really critical. So certainly in the Estonia model, there's discussion around the use of blockchain as being a potential opportunity to enable that. Dr. Kavukian did discuss the importance of having privacy by design embedded into that, and not to assume that that would take place. The other layer is also around the legislative framework and being able to enable that sharing. But again, it's very use case specific, and I must stress that trust will underpin everything. And having a legitimate reason, having a purposeful, reasonable reason to do this data sharing is going to be absolutely critical. And then the implementation is really going to be about the standard people, process, and technology, and ensuring that you have that ongoing process to ensure that it keeps working.
Did you want to respond to that at all?
I would just jump in that there can be sharing that doesn't involve personal information. The banking industry has had a number of public/private partnerships over the years where we share threat intelligence, so you can actually share the types of cyber threats that we're seeing. With the introduction of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, we see that as the hub that will then build on these types of initial partnerships and make them much broader. So sharing between private sector and public and the government, and then also the added benefit of sharing internationally. So we are very much looking forward to participating in that hub.
And how would emerging technologies impact this? I'm thinking in particular of artificial intelligence. Is this an area where artificial intelligence could be applied in order to be able to detect those types of threats?
Absolutely. This is all about connecting the dots. So to the extent that you can harness artificial intelligence to do the analytics, to make those connections, the better.
Did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with Ms. Mason, where artificial intelligence, machine learning, these are technologies that can actually enhance privacy because it takes out that human element as well. I also would like to reiterate the importance of having that use case and staying very true to the use case, and there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all opportunity. So ensuring that you have a framework that each and every use case that you want to undertake, that you have a way to guide it from beginning to end.
Now we're at
done?
time, so
Okay.
just cross the line. So, okay, we'll go up. We actually have 3 questioners left, so we have Mr. Angus for 3 minutes, Ms. Forte, and Mr. Bayless after that. So that's all I have on my slate as of now. So, Mr. Angus.
Thank you. Canadians have enormous respect for Statistics Canada, but when Statistics Canada decided to share the financial data as to get better information, there was a huge blowback, which suggests that Canadians are very particular about this kind of integration of financial information with government. Where do you stand on that? Are you sensitive that people don't want that kind of deep integration between their personal financial information and government, even if it's de-automatized?
And yes, we are very sensitized to it. I would note, first of all, that when Statistics Canada moved to compel the banks, we were not aware that that was happening. When it did take place, we obviously had serious concerns. And first of all, I want to clarify, no personal financial transaction data has been provided to Stats Canada. We were very concerned about the protection of the privacy and security of our customers' information, and obviously very encouraged to see the Privacy Commissioner conducting an investigation in that regard. So I think there is a sensitivity for sure about that level of data. The banking industry has had a long relationship with Stats Canada, providing them information that's helpful, but it's always been at an aggregated level. Mortgage default rates, that we had significant concerns with the nature of the request. We thought our discussions were at the exploratory stage where we were raising all of these flags, and we were obviously very surprised that it went the way it did.
Well, thank you. That's actually very reassuring to hear, because we've certainly heard it from many, many citizens who are deeply concerned. I just want to end on what I'd begun the conversation on, the issue of fraud, because we've been studying here the danger power of AI that's going to start to transform all manner of online life, deep fakes, the ability to create, to target better and better by getting more and more personal information, which is why breaches of personal information is so dangerous in this age. And I'm just interested generally in training, because if you're at a bank and someone may do a lot of inappropriate transactions because they have a gambling addiction, it's not necessarily illegal, but someone else that person may come in and want to make all kinds of withdrawals in order to pay for someone who doesn't exist, who's running a criminal gang in Eastern Europe because they're being suckered. And someone may have a deep fake video that's saying they need this money but they're in Europe. I mean, there's all manner of new elements that we haven't dealt with before in terms of training of staff, because it's your front line that's going to deal with a lot of this. How is that being done? Are tellers being trained? Are you monitoring at the teller gate?
Yes, there is training of bank personnel to identify what we call the flags where something is unusual. There's also electronic triggers. When you see transactions within an account, they'll be pulled out as being unusual. So it's both a human factor and also electronic monitoring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. And the last person up we have today is Ms. Fortier. Go ahead.
Merci. Et juste pour
Thank you. I'd like to say that I'm going to ask my questions in French. I'd like to apologize for my for my lateness. I had an issue in my writing, and I missed the presentations that were made. And so I looked at your written presentations to ask two specific questions. So if you'll allow me, I hope that this won't be a repetition, but I think it's important for me to better understand the presentation. So Mrs. Shea, my question is for you. And if you'd like to add in your answers, Mrs. Mason and Mrs. Madan, please go ahead. So in your presentation, you say that you think that the government is looking at service delivery, and you suggest that data management program should be adopted. So in the case that the government would adopt this type of approach, what are 2 or 3 advantages? But what are the risks that should be, what are the risks linked to this type of approach? What risks should be taken into account?
The risks of adopting a consistent approach?
Oui, est-ce qu'il y a des risques?
Yes. Are there risks that we have to think about?
Question about implementing systems. What are the risks of?
Well, it says that you want to adopt a model of management of data. So are there risks we should be taking into account if we choose to adopt that type of model?
It's a good question. I can't think of any risks in terms of adopting a model around sound data governance and sound data management. I believe by having these controls and having these methodologies and processes, you're really setting the government up for a win-win scenario. And as Mr. Angus had discussed around the issue with Stats Canada, that's an example in terms of where the potential legitimate purpose of processing was not considered. And a lot of issues potentially could have been handled better by having, first and foremost, a legitimate purpose, having purposeful and reasonable requests of information, and then having a sound governance process to ensure that, again, that whatever is stated is going to be the use, that you have the consistency and you actually act on that.
Ma deuxième question.
My second question. How should we, in the exercise of digitization of government services, adopt a change management strategy in the implementation? If I understand, SimCorp, in your experience, makes it so that you went from the print to the digital. And so are there elements that should be taken into account if we adopt this type of change?
Question. It is an actually excellent question, as I cannot underestimate the importance of change management as you go from having a traditional service into a digital service. You fundamentally are introducing many new things to an existing set of stakeholders that aren't necessarily aware of how do these technologies work? Why should I use these? How is this going to impact my life? So understanding upfront, having a change management program and mandate to ensure that you engage all of the stakeholders within your enterprise, or in this case, the government services, that there's appropriate training and awareness is going to become very, very critical. And that training and awareness has to be constantly reiterated. And it must be at a level that's very basic for everyone to understand. And it's also important to recognize that the speed of adoption is not going to be consistent. There's going to be early adopters and there's going to be laggers. And having a mechanism to bring everyone along that journey is going to be very critical.
Et parce que vous me permettez peut-être.
So if you'll allow me, so if you have a comment to make with regards to change management, would you have any suggestions, Mrs. Mason or Mrs. Mandel? If you have anything to say with regards to change management.
CBA agrees with the thoughts that Michelle has laid out. We do a lot of work within our association on financial literacy, and arguably there's some need for that similar education on data and digital literacy, just so Canadians understand what is happening when they're handing over information, whether it's personal financial information, health information, etc. So the literacy component, and Michelle spoke to this with her references to training and awareness, I think is really crucial, because we just keep going back to innovations will not be adopted if they do not gain the trust of Canadians. So I would just confirm agreement.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
I think that's it for today. Just want to thank you for, again, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Yeah, well, I know I'd given notice last on Tuesday, so I just wanted to, while we still have time here, just to move a motion to invite senior representatives of YouTube to explain the company's decision not to run political ads in the coming federal election and their refusal to comply with C-76.
Okay. Any discussion, Mr. Angus?
I think it's an excellent motion. I'm interested in having YouTube for a number of issues. I'm wondering if we can have, say, N-related issues relating to YouTube, so that we're not strict. Like, there may be other issues we may want to ask on.
Yeah, sure.
Well, do you have an amended motion, or you want to work that into your initial?
Sure, I'll just say invite senior representatives of YouTube to explain the company's decision not to run political ads in the coming federal election, the refusal to comply with C-76, and any other issues relevant to this committee.
Mr. Kent, any comments?
Yeah, I'd certainly agree, and I would certainly support this motion, but I think, as I mentioned in the last meeting, we also need to get the Chief Electoral Officer and the Privacy Commissioner here to explain their extrapolation or their interpretation of what C-76 is going to require parties and individual politicians to do with regards to data protection.
Okay.
So,
to me, that
could be a follow-on from
a separate
from
motion.
YouTube.
Would you propose a separate motion, or would you?
Well, I think there's a series of witnesses that are all related in this case, and it would be relevant. I think as a follow-on. I don't know, as a friendly amendment.
Why don't we start with this, and then we can talk amongst ourselves how it develops.
So, okay, Mr. Angus.
Yeah, I think it's easiest that we go with this. We can. I mean, the door is open. Yeah. We don't need to establish it as like the full-out study.
I agree.
The door may take us in a number of places. So let's go with this, and then we'll see where
so is that next. Is that fair, Mr. Kent? And if not, another motion could be forthcoming
on the basis of the traditional collegiality of this committee. Yes.
Okay, so the motion's put before. Any further? No further discussion. All in favor of that motion? All opposed? That motion carries.
And just one final thing, because I know the Canadian Bankers Association had, in their white paper, had suggested, or in your white paper, has suggested a few specific recommendations, including legislative amendments that will allow us to move closer to a digital ID. And I recognize that the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework is a next step, but to the extent that there are specific recommendations that were not in your opening statement and that you did not get to in answer to the questions. Similar to that recommendation with respect to legislative amendments, it would be helpful as we make recommendations to the government, if you follow up in writing, if there's any specific recommendations that you think this committee should be making to the government, that would be one example. Perhaps there are others, but I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think, is that it, folks? Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.